Good evening and welcome, everybody. I am Terry Kay of the Jewish Grandparents Network. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for navigating your relationship with your adult children, the parents of your grandchildren. We so appreciate that you made time to join us. For those of you who've been to JGN webinars before, tonight's session is a bit different, and let me tell you about that. Our presenter, Sue Groner, has fashioned the session as a casual conversation rather than as a presentation. That means that I, and I hope you, will be asking Sue questions, and our goal is really to keep it chatty and informal. Now, because I'll be talking to Sue directly and looking at her, I am not able to look at chat. So to manage that, I'm so grateful to my colleagues, Sarah Reed and Avery Markle, who will be watching chat and will share with Sue and me any of your questions that you write there. On that note, since this can be a sensitive subject that we're discussing tonight, if you prefer not to speak out loud and not to even write your question publicly in chat because your name will be associated, please feel free to chat privately with Sarah Reed. So it's Sarah R-E-I-D, and you can see her at the top of the list of participants as a co-host. Now, if you write to Sarah, Sarah will read your question aloud at an appropriate moment and will not use your name. On the note of not using names, we got quite a number of questions in advance, and I will read those aloud as time permits. They will all be anonymous. We will not be using names. So in order to read those questions properly, you'll see me glancing down at my paper. Please forgive me if my eyes go down, but that is what I'm doing. I'm about to introduce Sue Groner, but first, Sue and I have a question for you. And we'd love it if you would put your answers in chat. What is the most challenging aspect of navigating your own relationship with your adult child? What is the most challenging aspect of navigating your own relationship with your adult child? While you're writing, I'm going to welcome our expert facilitator tonight, writer, author, founder of the Parenting Mentor, Sue Groner. Welcome, Sue. And before I even ask you the first question, let's give our friends a few minutes to write, and then if you'd like to jump in and read a couple of the answers.
Yeah, I'll start because they're coming up already. And hi, everybody. So nice to be here. Okay, not being too bossy, being shut out from communication. My daughter always thinks she's right. My daughter's so busy, Catholic spouse, understanding their need for space, boundaries, and different Jewish practices, moving from parent to co-adult, dealing with my son and not overstepping their rules, when they ask for advice but don't like our response, give advice without judgment, not living in the same cities, different parenting techniques, different feelings and views about Judaism, following all their rules and respecting their wishes, very challenging, problems with how son-in-law treats and disciplines our grandson, having him not think I'm telling him what to do, exasperating and fresh responses. They're planning on moving farther away. My son and daughter-in-law have 2 grandsons, travel the world and have lived on the other side of the world for the last 5 years. My son acts like his dad.
Sue, I'm going to jump in because
okay, this could go on forever.
I tell you what we'll do. We'll, if there's nothing compromising the chat, we'll include the transcript in our follow-up email tomorrow with the recording. So may I just jump in with my first question, which is really an obvious one, is could you tell us about your work at the Parenting Mentor, what you do there, and how it relates to grandparents?
Sure. I mean, my goal as the parenting mentor, and by the way, I work individually with people, I work a lot in companies supporting the parent groups at different companies. So my goal is to help parents be happier and more relaxed, just to reduce the everyday stress and anxiety that's inevitable when you're a parent. And it's kind of the same thing being a grandparent. I mean, you're not on 24/7, but how can you look at your relationship with your own child and make that a more positive experience and less stressful? And how can you engage better with your grandchildren as well?
And so, which leads me to ask, what have you discovered about how our children change when they become parents themselves, and what that means for our relationship, how our relationship changes as a result?
Yeah. I mean, I think when our children become adults themselves, there's already a lot of changes. And then the bigger change obviously happens when they have their own children. I mean, inevitably, there's going to be more stress. They're going to be exhausted. They become hyper focused and hyper vigilant on everything that they do and everyone around them is doing and how they interact with their children. More worry, more anxiety. And so I think for us, well, I'm not a grandparent yet, but when I become one, I certainly would see that we have to be more keyed in to how our children are managing being a parent and really dig deep in how it was for us and remember what that was like. And so it's sort of hard. I think, I forget there's a term for it, where as a grandparent, you kind of forget the hard stuff that you had when you were raising your own kids. And it just, well, why are you having such a hard time with it? For me, it was so easy. So, we didn't have this and we didn't have that. I think that there's a tendency for us to want to do that as grandparents and probably not, that kind of interaction can cause more stress.
So I think you're referring to selective memory, right?
Yeah.
You spoke about the parents become hyper vigilant. Could you tell us more what you mean about that?
Yeah, I think with everything that they're doing with and for their own children, safety, food, screens, toys. I'm sure there are a lot of grandparents that are here tonight who've been told you're not allowed to get this kind of toy for our grandchild. You're not allowed to feed them these kinds of foods. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do these are, there's a lot of rigidity, I think, that happens. And that can be really frustrating as a grandparent.
We got a number of questions in that regard, and we'll get to that. Thank you. So which leads me to ask, do you have top tips that you could share with us for smooth relationships when our adult children become parents themselves?
Yeah, I do. And even when I work with parents with just adult children who I don't have kids yet, the number one easy fix for any relationship issues, no unsolicited advice. So just commit that to memory. No unsolicited advice, because even when that advice is coming from a really good place, which I'm sure it is, that we as parents, we as grandparents want to give our kids the benefits of the wisdom that we have. However, it's heard as judgment no matter what. Well, why don't you do this? You could do that. Have you tried this? They hear, I'm not doing what I should have done. Why didn't I think of that on my own? Right. So it's, and if you're not asking for advice, any advice is not going to be welcome. So first of all, no unsolicited advice. Number two, I would say listen if your kids are complaining about something, whether it's about their spouse or their job or their children or how it is raising the children, that their struggles, even if you don't think, like, really listen to what they're saying. And instead of feeling like it's your job to fix that problem for them, just validate. I get that. Boy, it sounds like you're really, really overwhelmed right now. And then be there with love and support. Validate. I get it. I see what you're going through. Really tough. Is there anything I can do to help you? I love you. Can I help in any way? And that, I think, is all they really want to hear. I mean, imagine like if you have an issue and you tell your partner that you had a problem with something. So and so was really rude, or you waited for something to happen, or something, whether it was at work, whatever the situation is, and you're complaining about it, you kind of don't want them to say to you, well, did you do this? Why didn't you just go and talk to them? Or why didn't you do this or that? When in fact, all you want is for them to say, oh, I'm really sorry you had such a crummy day. That must have really been hard. And just to give you a hug. Like that's what we all want. And so, and even the grandchildren, that's what they're going to want too. When they're complaining about something, it's not our role to fix, but it's lovely when you can validate and make the emotional connection with your child or your grandchild. Okay, another one. And I know this was in some of the comments that people said, and number three, top tip is to respect the parents' choices. And I know that can be really hard. And, feel free to complain to your friends, roll your eyes so they don't see it, whatever you need to do to make yourself feel better. But you kind of have to, because if you think back, were there times where your parents questioned what you were doing? Right. And I work a lot with parents when they complain about their parents, the grandparents, they're always telling me how I should be doing things. And, the response that I tell them that would be helpful for the grandparent to hear, and I think it would be helpful for me to say that in this environment, is to share how, when you were raising me, you did things your way and you learned as you went. And my partner and I are really enjoying the process of figuring out on our own. And we really want to do that. But if I have a problem with something and we can't, you will be the first person that we ask for advice. And so if you think about, kind of put yourself into their head, I think that could be helpful. And then the last thing, which I already kind of said, is just be careful about in anything that you say that you're not judgmental. So when in the communication, oh, you're letting Jason do that? You're letting Jill wear those shoes? I got that one when my daughter was younger. Or, why would you? Why didn't you? What were you thinking? Those are all really, really judgmental comments. And again, I understand, like, you're saying that, like, I don't think you should be allowing them to do that because that's not good for them, is where you're coming from. It's all from the love for your grandchild and for the well-being of your grandchild, but it doesn't come across that way. So I think those would be my top tips.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm noticing that there are comments in chat. I've just written to Sarah to say that I'll ask Sarah in a little bit when I've asked you a couple more questions, Sue, to please read it out, a couple of the questions, because we're so grateful to those of you who are writing and asking questions. I want to pose to you something that we saw recently in our Facebook group. And I've asked Sarah to put into chat the link to our private Facebook group. It's a really robust, over 16,000 people of loving grandparents. And there's some really cool conversations and enlightening, and JG, and we learn a lot from it. So recently there was a thread where several grandparents posted that they have childcare or babysitting responsibilities, commitments. However, the grandkids are sick. And so there was, what we saw in the responses and actually in the posts themselves are like, how do I balance my responsibility, my commitment to babysit, with my own needs and my own desires, and often my own household rules? And what came through was a sort of feeling of guilt. So I wonder if you could share guidance with us about how we as grandparents can reconcile our own wishes and desires with what the parents expect and often need.
Well, the example that you gave, which I would have loved to have read what was commented on, I think that when a health is really important, and if health is an issue, I think that needs to be stated very clearly. Like there can't just be surprises. Oh, she's sick. I don't think I want to come. Like, I think from the very beginning, the clearer that you are with your child, or with the parent, the clearer that you are about anything, and that you have buy-in and agreement on this, will make so many issues go away. So if health is an issue, then you got to say up front, I love taking care of Jason. It's like the joy of my week. And I'm so happy that you live close and I can do this. However, if he's sick, I can't take care of him because I can't get sick, and I can't let daddy get sick because he's immunocompromised, or whatever the situation is. If it's just not that, but you just don't want to get sick, and kids have germs, a lot of them, that's okay. You're looking out for yourself, you're looking out for your health, and you're looking out so that you can take care of them in the future. And I don't think that you should feel any guilt around that at all. But I think it's important to put it out there at the beginning when you make that commitment. And if you've made the commitment and you're finding that to be a problem, then you need to say, hey, listen, I love doing this, but this one thing has really been bothering me, and I just want to share it with you. And so that and maybe it'll help you to have backup plan for those times when Jason is sick, so that you're not left unable to do the things that you need to do on that day. Again,
part of the problem is it's so hard to say no. I mean, I feel sure all our friends out there have experienced this. It's like, no, I can't say no. You feel guilty and you feel a sense of responsibility. But
I think if you broach it when it's not happening, then you don't have anything to feel guilty about, because you're not saying no and you're not leaving the parent in the lurch. But and you're setting a ground rule, which are, the more ground rules, the more framework there is for how you guys are going to all work together, the better off everyone will be. And I think they'll appreciate and respect you being really clear about that.
Okay. Thank you, Sue. I would like to jump to a question that we got in advance. I'm going to be looking down at my paper. We got actually several questions about relationships with the in-law, the adult in-law child, the partner or spouse of your own child. And may I just read you a couple of what what people, what a couple of, one of our friends wrote, I have trouble communicating with my adult in-law children. How can I apply, how can I get on better with my in-law children? Sometimes, and they imply that their own child often sides with the spouse or the partner. Somebody else wrote, how does our family nurture a loving relationship with our own son, given that his spouse pressures him to not have a loving relationship with us? So would you be able to talk about how what you have said so far applies to the in-law children?
So I'm a big person on coming at any situation where you start out in a really positive way. You know, like the worst thing that you can do is put somebody on the defensive, right? So even if you're talking to your child about the in-law child, about the spouse, I think that in a way, like where you really want them to defend you, at the end of the day, I mean, just like you want your own spouse to defend you, you want there means they're being a really good spouse. That said, I think that you can talk to your child and say, hey, listen, I get these weird vibes, or it makes me sad. And, I love you guys so much that I want to see if there's something we can do to make things better between all of us. I'm not saying, why is she like this to me? She's so mean and she's disrespectful and she doesn't include me. And, that's not going to get you anywhere. Like everybody knows the situation, but just say, what can I do? What can we do so that things are better? Because we really love you and we want to enjoy each other's. We want you to enjoy us. We want to enjoy you. If there are things that we're doing that are or did that were off-putting, please share with me what they are, because I don't know, and I didn't do this on purpose. I want to grow. I want to learn. So I want you to share with me, and I'd love to take so and so out to lunch and spend a little time and see, if we can really like kind of start over and get to know each other on a different level, because this is important. The tone of voice that you use, the tone and manner in anything is so incredibly important, and so when I'm creating my own little scripts here, I'm doing it partly so that you hear the way that I'm speaking. And it may not be comfortable initially for you to be that way, but practice. Practice with your partner, practice with a friend, look in the mirror and do it. Because it's how you come off, and you want to come off in a genuine way also, is so important. I mean, and chances are you probably don't know what the issue was. It could have been one thing at one point that they just couldn't get over. You don't know. But I think the more you approach this in a loving way, and what can I do to make things better, instead of pointing fingers, will get you really far.
Yeah, I'm seeing that one of our Deborah and Greg wrote, I believe in chat, our children should be putting their spouse first, even when it's hard for us as the parent. So I'm going to thank you so much. I'm going to ambush somebody among our participants. With this person doesn't know I'm going to call on them. And Sue, I hope you don't mind. Ruth Nemzoff. So Ruth is I didn't realize you were going to be here tonight, but Ruth is a member of a good friend of the Jewish Grandparents Network, and on our National Advisory Council, and is also an expert in the area and has written a book called Don't Bite Your Tongue, about topics like this. And Ruth, I was just wondering if there's anything you, again, with no warning, is there anything you'd like to add to what Sue has said or to ask Sue yourself?
Well, I think that it's important not to feel silenced. Because if you feel silenced, believe me, your kids hear you and you hear them. So if it's bothering you, figure out a way to say it. And I would say if you have advice, sometimes you can say that you never want to harp. But you can say, you know, this is really bothering me. I want to make a suggestion. You don't have to follow it. I just want to make a suggestion. And I think that, you know, if you do such and such, it might be easier for you. Now, I'm sure you have good reasons why you're doing it the way you're doing it, but I just wanted to throw this in the hopper because I know in my own parenting, as many ideas that I could get from others were helpful. And that's it. I'm going to tell you once, and I don't want to keep talking about this. So that's just a technique because, you know, silence isn't always golden.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
Also, because I love that you brought that up. And I always suggest this with parents with children and they're having conversations, but we can do the same thing. And, you know, sometimes you can give advice in a sort of roundabout way by saying, you know, I was talking to some of my friends the other day and their kids are doing X, Y, or Z. What do you think about that? Do you think that's a good idea? Have you tried that? I wasn't really sure how I felt about it. And so it's more when you present it in a more general way, sometimes they don't feel like my mother's telling me what to do.
Right. I was going to say in my book on Don't Roll Your Eyes, Making In-Laws into Family, I talk about using third parties, and the third party can be a book or a movie or
Right.
an event that happened that you can share. But just find a way to say it that's genuine and real and that you're not afraid.
And thank you so much. Thank you,
Ruth.
Ruth. Thank you for jumping on. And I'm seeing that Michelle wrote in chat that using humor helps. I know I'm a neurotic Jewish mother, but I was wondering why you know, whatever, or some other form of humor. So Sarah, could I ask you to unmute and share any questions that came into chat?
Yes, so we actually received several questions about in-laws specifically. Just what do you do when the in-laws are very opinionated, or let's see, how you would adjust these tips. You've expanded on that. And one comment about the son-in-law not respecting family traditions when their other son and non-Jewish daughter-in-law do. So several questions about.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Sarah. Actually, that makes me think that the last question Sarah asked about the religion, so on, there a couple of questions came in advance, and may I piggyback those? May I put those, combine those, or integrate them? The question was the following: what if your adult children or grandchildren have no interest in Jewish anything or are hostile to Jewish celebrations and holidays? What if the adult children have no interest in living a Jewish life and it's important to you as the grandparent? Could you give us some guidance about that?
You know, I wish I had a really good answer to get the kids to like all of a sudden totally want to do the Jewish things. And sometimes, I mean, I will say that I was not always super gung-ho about all the traditions. And my daughter, when she was like 6, became really interested. And she sort of led us in the direction of doing more and giving her a Jewish education, etc. So sometimes that can happen. But the first thing is, I mean, you really do, as hard as it is, you have to respect the parents' wishes, you know. But I also think it's helpful to understand where they're coming from. And again, it's how you present this and how you ask these questions. But are they against religion and the religious parts of it, or the cultural parts? And I think there can be a really big distinction. And so, if it's more the religion and less the culture, then maybe there's a way to work out so that, say, hey, it's just, this holiday just represents this, and it's a way for us to get together and have a special meal. And we don't have to share things that you're uncomfortable with right now. And I mean, because you're not going to be able to change their minds by getting angry and upset and trying to force it on them. I mean, which is unfortunate, but, and then you got to eventually, maybe the grandchildren express an interest in, because their other friends who are Jewish are doing things and they want to do them as well, and they're feeling left out. So for whatever reason at this time, I would really try to talk to them and understand why they feel the way they do without trying to change their minds. Just really do some active listening, ask some questions, and let them know that this conversation is not at all to sway them, but to really just understand.
Thank you so much. Would you, Sue, allow us to take a couple more comments from our participants?
Absolutely.
About the subject? So Barbara has offered to unmute. Barbara, if you would like to speak, we will spotlight you as long as your camera is on.
Okay. Basically, what I said is, I think we have to realize that our grandchildren, being brought up in a very different world than most of us were brought up, and most of us brought our children up in. And they take a very different way of raising them. My kids live 1,000 miles away, so I'm not even there on a daily basis. But I know they watch very little TV. They get a treat after dinner to watch a sports event or several Bluey. Everyone must know about Bluey, but very little TV. They don't have iPads. The only time they get on those is when we FaceTime. They eat mostly vegetarian. And, it's hard for me to swallow a lot of it, no pun intended. And where Sue was just talking to about the religion, and my son is not interested in his religion. My daughter-in-law is Catholic. We had a church wedding with a rabbi. She does her best at the holidays. She'll put up Hanukkah stuff. We go up at Hanukkah, but Rosh Hashanah, because we're not there, it doesn't happen. It's hard. It's when I go to a friend's child's grandchild's bar mitzvah, it kills me because I'm never going to have that, but I have to acknowledge it. I know there was a conversation months ago, Terry, on the website about several people said they had been invited to their grandchildren's baptism and did they go, could they not go, whatever. I've never asked if my grandchildren have been baptized or christened, and I assume it's the same thing. That's my ignorance, I guess. The old don't ask the question if you don't know the answer. If they had, and I don't know if I was invited, would I go? I don't know how I would handle that. And that was a big discussion, if you remember, a couple months back on that, Terry. But I think the reality is it's their lives, and we have to kind of go with the flow, whether we like it, agree with it, understand it. My kids are starting, my grandson is now in, a day school, private school. And, he's going to parties now where they're having chicken nuggets. Well, my kids never had a chicken nugget, and he's finding out about all these foods that are out there. And it's kind of interesting. But it's hard. It's very hard. it's my only child, and they're 1,000 miles away. And being the mother of the son, as I made a comment on that, that's a very different world too. And everyone who has a son versus a daughter understands that as well. And her mother lives 3 miles from us. So when they come up here, they spend the time at her house because that's where, it's hard. And we just kind of say yes. And a lot of what you said, Sue, about, not making suggestions or offering unless they're asked. And you just bite your tongue a lot.
You do. You actually do have to bite your tongue a lot. And it's hard. And, but that said, at the end of the day, I mean, these are like our children that we raised. And the fact that they're independent thinkers and doing things in a certain way where, they didn't just make up their mind to be vegetarians. They're probably doing it for some well thought out reasons. And, I think like it's sort of the perspective of like, wow, look at them. They're not exactly the way I was. They're not doing exactly the things that the way we raised them. And, they're independent and thoughtful and caring people. And so I think like you have to be proud of your son in that respect, or, your child, because of the person that they've become and I think that's really important. And as hard as it is for them, the first thing that I say to any parent in any of the workshops that I do is that parenting is not an 18-year engineering project. And, that sort of comes from all the things that we want to give our kids, all the activities and how there are expectations of them in the classroom, on the stage, on the field, and all of this behavioral stuff. And so that they become, super qualified to get into a good college and then get a good job and have a happy life, which we know is not the case. And I think that, when as a grandparent, you can't keep engineering the way that your children are raising your grandchildren either. As hard, and that's hard sometimes. And it's hard when your child does something that you don't, makes a life decision about something that you didn't necessarily agree with. And yet, I think that we have to understand, like, wow, these are kids who are so capable now, and I always think rather than, and you can think about this too with your own grandchildren, that rather than raising these kids to do X, Y, and Z, let's raise the kids to be self-reliant and resilient kids who have good problem solving skills and good coping mechanisms. That's, I think, what's really important. And that's where the validation of feelings comes in. That's where the not making suggestions comes in, because they're smart and they can figure things out on their own a lot of the time. And that's a respect thing as well.
Yes, Barbara, thank you so much for speaking out loud. Really appreciate that. And anybody, Ruth, are you raising your hand? And Ruth, we'll come to you now. You can Sarah will spotlight you. If you can unmute. Anybody else, just raise your Zoom hand. I'm not going to, better to use, I see another Barbara. Better to raise your Zoom hand, otherwise we can't see everybody. Ruth, jump on in.
So I just wanted to say, in terms of religion, what you can have a discussion, you have a right to live your own life. And if you celebrate the holidays, you can say, look, I am not trying to convert your child, but I would like to share whatever I do in my life. And when they come to my house, of course, I celebrate the holidays. You can't control the child doesn't control what you do, but you might say, for example, Purim just happened. I'd love to make Hamantashen with the kids, and you begin on all the secular things about holidays. and you begin to share, or you share a story, like maybe on one of your Zoom calls, and it's easier as they get older because you have many more ways. But you can say, oh, I'm using grandma, 3 generations ago, dishes. They were her Passover dishes because, many people change things, and you mentioned something about Passover. 2 sentences, just over the years. And then as they get older, and remember, grandchildren aren't always toddlers. They aren't always babies. They become school-age children. They become adults. And then you can get into further discussions. But there are many ways where you can share your heritage without converting your children. And you can be respectful that way. And hopefully you can have an open discussion with them about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Leslie writes in chat, what about Ruth Nemzov's comment about people feeling silenced versus the art of biting the tongue? One approach allows for conversation and perhaps difficult conversations. The other rewards the silence. Faye, is that Faye? Am I getting it right? Go ahead, Faye.
Yes. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think it's a wonderful discussion. I'm having 2 different things to. One, I learned at an interfaith workshop I went to when my first son was gonna marry a Presbyterian woman 20-something years ago. And it was the suggestion to put Jewish things in your home. If you live near your kids, I don't, but when I'm down there, I put in a Yortzeit candle if you have it. Leave out the Shabbos candlesticks if you have them, or put a picture of Jerusalem up on the wall, but where they can see these things. And they'll ask you themselves. It won't be you trying to say, can I get them to listen to me talk about this Yortzeit candle? They will ask you, what is this candle burning for? They they do it. And my grandchildren, we were collecting money in a tzedakah box, and we got into it. They were young. They were like 5 years old. There were four of them, but there that day there were just 2 of them, and that we got into a very good discussion about who is this for? Why do they need money? Can't they just go to the bank if they want to get money? And then you can talk about this as a Jewish value that we help people, but they come up with it, they started out just counting the money. And then I said, well, let's decide what to do with it, and it was a discussion. It wasn't good or bad that they hadn't had it at home, but I was privileged, I thought, to do that discussion. The other thing I would say that in society now, you can be Jewish and not have too many. I mean, maybe people go have a Seder and go to shul or synagogue twice a year. I mean, that's a good Jewish person these days. So what I found in doing some research about healthy families is when kids know where they came from, they feel more secure, because there's so many things coming at them now, and information and online and everything like that. But if they can understand that they're coming from a 2,000, 5,000-year-old, however many years old you want to make it, tradition, and even if you just say to them, would you like to hear about what it was like, when I was a little girl? And then if I say I did a Hebrew school after school and this and that and holidays and matzah and hamantash, they would say, no doubt, why did you do so many Jewish things? Because they don't have that same. And it makes it not about that, but it, I also did a lot of other things when I was young. I can't, nothing in the proportion of the Jewish things, but yes, so they can ask about anything then. And I think the thing that that gave me this idea was one of my grandsons was in the 6th grade, I think, and they were doing for his school, he had to do like or he chose to do like a news broadcast about immigrants, refugees that were leaving Syria and going to Germany to settle, and what it was like for them, and I was thinking, we my grandmother and my grandfather on both sides, we had immigrant stories we could have been telling as a a real dramatic story about how they came here. And
Thank you so much, Faye. Sorry to cut you off.
no, that's fine.
Thank you
I could
so much
ramble.
No, I so appreciate that you were brave enough to speak on camera in front of 90 people. So thank you so much. And I want to just be sure, Sue, if you will allow me, that there were a couple more people who wrote in advance, and I really want to respect the fact that they did that. So one of our grandparent members wrote, can you address issues for step-grandparents? I'm in a second marriage. My husband's first wife died, so I'm wife number 2, and I'm grandmother to a stepchild's child. What should I take into consideration in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think whether it's a divorce or, a second, or, from someone who already passed away, I think it's important to talk to the child and see what they're comfortable with. I mean, I definitely have heard of situations where, the real grandparent, the grandmother, is very resentful of the other, the step grandmother, and, calling herself a grandmother when she's not really. And I think talking to the child about how they feel about your role as the step grandparent is really important. By saying, I want to, I feel I love your kids. I love, being able to be involved with them in any way, shape, form. I just don't want to overstep if it makes you uncomfortable. Again, I think having like open conversations about any of these things is really helpful, because you don't know. You don't know how they feel, and they don't know how you feel. And so it's just having these loving, open conversations is really what's going to make a difference. And then you'll know you don't have to worry about it anymore. And you can, maybe it's something that you do slowly. You start doing a few things and see what they're like. If you want to have them the kids come and stay with you, whatever it is. I think the open, loving conversation about what you'd like to do, what their expectations are, is important. And that's important with anything. I think we have another question about that, so I'll wait for you to ask me.
Yeah, well, no, this one, I've got a really tricky one for you now. You ready?
Okay.
This grandparent wrote, is not Jewish. My adult children have ostracized me, the grandparent who is not Jewish, even though they committed in writing to establishing an inclusive and loving home. How would you suggest I approach the situation?
I'd probably like to know a little bit more about the relationship between the parent and the child. Like if it's purely because it's a religious thing, that would be surprising to me. I wonder if there's more that meets the eye. But again, I think, and maybe there were issues in the past. And, as the parent talking to your adult child, by saying, you know what, I know I didn't do everything perfectly, and I made mistakes, and I'm really sorry for those. You know, I did my best, but I didn't know. And I love the way that you guys are parenting because there's so much more information out there and you're really taking all of this to heart. So you're putting them like, you're taking this situation and you're making them a really positive piece of the puzzle, right? Instead of saying, why don't you do this? And you never include me. And then say, and it makes me so sad that I don't get to hang out with you and I don't get to hang out with my grandchildren. You know, is there some way we can work through this? You know, do you think that, I mean, if you know, what are your concerns? Maybe they're concerned that, you know, this particular parent is going to preach the gospel. I don't know. But again, we don't know these answers. And if you come at these situations in a healthy conversation, I think you're gonna do the best that you can, because you can't force them to include you. But if you say, I care about our relationship, and I care about your children, my grandchildren, and let's work through this. Are you willing to work through this? Can we give this a try? You know, that's such a great phrase with any issue. You know, if they're hesitant to have the kids come and stay at your house, maybe say, let them come for a couple of hours and we'll do lunch in an afternoon, and let's start that way. Could we give that a try? You know, and you're not pushing anyone into a corner that way. And you're saying, let's talk about it. Let's tweak it. Let's try something else. And let's do whatever we need to do to make this work.
On that note, may I share with you that we have the Jewish Grandparents Network has a session on a difficult subject coming up on May 14th. Sarah, if I could ask you to put that into chat, the link that you might want to sign up for the session is called When Grandparents Get Cancelled and What to Do About It. I'm not saying that this is the case exactly here in this question, but it might be something that is pertinent to several of our participants. That is May the 14th, and the link to register is in chat. We have just a few minutes left. I've covered all the questions that came in advance. I do have a couple more, but I'd much rather open the floor for the last 10 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes, to anybody. You can just unmute and speak, or you can raise your hand.
Terry, you know what? I just want to add something that I think is really important, because this has been an issue that I've gotten from a lot of parents about the grandparents. And I think it's a really helpful conversation that you can have with your adult child in terms of being a grandparent. And that's like setting expectations. So, you know, I think it's always great if you can say to your kid, hey, you know what, you're overwhelmed. What can I do to help you? Right? Because you may think, like, I go over there, I clean up the kitchen, I make their beds, I do this and that. And it may not be what your kid really wants from you as help. And so when you talk together and say, what are the things that, you know, within the realm of my capabilities that you need from me, that you'd like to see me do? Let me know, because I think I'm doing things and maybe they're not what you need. Like, how amazing would that be for your kid to hear that? Like, they're going to go, oh my gosh, that's like, I can't believe you asked me that. That's the nicest thing to hear. You know, maybe they don't need you to do the dishes. Maybe they need you to play with the kids while they're doing something else. I mean, you don't know. So I think I think setting those expectations, you know, because you can't be the grandparent who comes in, cooks the meals and brings food over and helps clean up and takes the kids here and gets on the floor and plays. Like, that's a lot, you know? And if you're that kind of grandparent, congratulations. But kind of figuring out what you can do and what is important to your child from under the helping piece, I think would be really helpful and important.
when you and I were talking in preparation, I gave Sue this example when she raised this as so important. I said, yeah, I live in New Jersey. My younger daughter lives in Brooklyn. And every time, so it's a bit of a schlep through Manhattan. Every time I would go there, the first thing I would do would be either pack the dishwasher, wash the dishes in the sink, fill the dishwasher, or unpack it. Until she said to me, she looked me in the eye and she said, Mom, when you come here, please don't pay any attention to the dishwasher. I want you to be, if you would, playing with Naomi. And I said, okay, but it was so hard for me not to do that, you know. And I bet we all have experienced that. Thank you, Sue. Let's open it up for the last few minutes to anybody who'd like to raise your hand. Just unmute. Say your question out loud. Beth, would you like to say your question? Feel free to unmute. All right. While Beth, perhaps.
Yeah, it's just my hair was washed, so it's in a turban. So I didn't turn.
Okay.
Grandparents are often grandparents to more than one child. And both of my daughters have very different spouses and very different ways of parenting. And the older one in particular, because of certain reasons, she does very barbed conversations, both to her sister and then expects us to stand up to her. And sometimes you get stuck in the crossfire. And that's a piece that you haven't really discussed because it isn't that easy. Sometimes you agree with the commentary, but you wouldn't say it that way to the younger sibling. And then the younger sibling comes back with equally as valid comments about the parenting style and everything about the older child. And you're kind of stuck because you love both your kids. Sometimes you agree with the statements being made and you try to stay out of it. And it's a complicated juggling act because sometimes there's things that you see that are very serious that could cause your grandchild harm that are not. And sometimes you see in the relationship of your children things that an abusive or manipulating spouse who's very controlling and trying to make sure that he is pulling her back from her family and her sibling. And you see this happening and you go, wow, it's obvious to all the rest of us. Why is it not obvious to you? But you don't want to comment. And at one point we did comment, or I commented to my husband, who then shared it with the daughter. And there was this extreme blow up, like, I will never talk to you. And my husband is livid and my mother-in-law lives with us. And you made this comment. And it was like, it was a private comment that somehow I did not say it. My spouse said it directly to the daughter in some manner that got misinterpreted.
Yeah, all that stuff it's tough. And you're right. Like, you don't want to, it's called triangulation, where you're like getting involved with the other two. And, the more that you can say, wow, yeah, you know what? I can't believe how many different parenting styles there are right now. And, each to his own, because you can't get involved. You can't pit one against the other. You don't want to get involved in that either, because it's a no-win situation.
I want to pause to say that we're at 7:59 and we usually end at 8 o'clock sharp. Sue has agreed to stay on for another few minutes, so I'm going to, I hate to say officially, declare the session here, our gathering over. No, I'm not going to say that. If you need to leave because we are at 8 o'clock, we thank you so much for joining us. And Sue, to you too, for sharing your expertise.